Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be going over some basic built-in functions into Python. Some of these will be review, others of them will be brand new. And I'd like to just point out ahead of time that there are some functions that I will not be going over in this video, but I will go over in other videos. So I figured I'd just stick to the basics for now. So we'll just go ahead and kind of start off with a string, and then we'll kind of work our way down. Within Python, when it comes to functions, what they usually do is they'll assist with your program and allowing you to just kind of perform really some kind of just basic tasks. For example, let's say we have a variable and we have a variable called apples. And apples is assigned a value of 1, 2, 3. Now, the apples, the variable actually, has the integer value of 123. If we wanted to, we could potentially change 123 into a string value by using the str function. So if we were to print str apples, what would happen is we would get 123. Now it's just being read as 123 and not necessarily a string, and we're not really sure if it is a string. So if we wanted to see if apples was converted to a string, what we could do is we could add type, and then within type, it'd be able to tell us that apples is actually a string. Now, if you're a little confused, always start from little and go big. Always start from inner and go out. So if you remember PEMDAS from school and math, you always start within the parentheses and then you work your way out. So we're starting with apples, which is 123. And then we're saying apples, we want it to be converted into a string with str. And then from there, we're going ahead and saying, hey, Python, go ahead and tell us what the type apples is. And by printing out apples and everything within, we'll be able to see that apples was in fact converted to a string, and it has the class, aka the type of string. So now you actually kind of know the basics of 3 different functions working together. Likewise now, if we were to, for example, have already 123 as a string, and let's say hypothetically we wanted to convert it to an integer, what we could do is rather than doing str for string, we would do int for int. And then if we were to print that, we would get the int. So again, work from inward out. So we're starting with variable, which is 123, a string. We're converting it into an integer, and then we're going to say what type is this actually, and then we're going to go ahead and print it out. So that kind of covers the basics of string, int, and print. And then let's actually go ahead and move on to float next. So float will be a little more complex, but just know, for those that don't know what a float is, a float equals 0.0. What I mean by that is not necessarily the variable, I'm not necessarily referring to that, but what I'm saying is if there's a decimal within the number, the decimal is actually the float. So the decimal will go ahead and share the difference between what an integer and what a float is. So this is a float, and then an integer is this, a whole number. So let's say hypothetically we wanted to take 123, which is a string, convert it into an integer, and then convert it into a float. What we would do is we'd go ahead and add float right here, because again, we're working inside out. And then let's get rid of this. Let's make it proper. And then we should be good to go. So if we were to go ahead and run this, we would get class float. So again, working inward out, string, which is apples, we're converting it into an integer, and then we're going to convert that into a float. And then we're going to say, what type is it? And now let's get rid of the type so we can go ahead and see the decimal printed out. So now we see that 123, which was a string, was converted into an integer, and then converted again into a float. Next, we'll be working on what a Boolean value is. And just know a Boolean value, Boolean, is usually true or false. So what I mean by this is Boolean values either show up a 1, which is true, or 0, which is false. So if, for example, we were to take 1 right here, let's just convert it back to an integer, and we'll have 1 as it is. And then let's go ahead and say, Python, let's go ahead and figure out what type of value is apples. So rather than having integer right here, what we do is we change it to bool, and this bool would then be converted, or would convert 1 into a Boolean value, and then we would change float to type to see what type it is. So again, we're working inside out, so we're starting with 1, we're converting it into a Boolean value, and then we want to clarify what Boolean value is with the type function, and then we're going to print all this out. So if we run this, what we would get is we would get the class of bool. Now, Booleans are very important when it comes to loops and working with truthy or falsy, which I'll get into later. And finally, we'll be working with the next function, which is length and input. So let's go ahead and move these to the top. Go ahead and paste them right here. Now, when working with the length function, len, aka length, will allow you to determine what the length of a variable or of a object is within Python. So for example, if we had a bunch of gibberish as a string for apples, and we wanted to see what the length of the variable was, like what the actual total length would be, what we could do is we could do len for length, and then we could print that, and we'd be able to see the total length of the variable. And in this case, we have 18. Now, another way of being able to do this is if, for example, you wanted to have apples printed out in its entirety, what we could do is we could do print apples, and then we could do a slice. And for those that are not familiar with slices, just know we're going to be starting at a position on the left side of the colon. And on the right side of the colon, we're going to be going up to, but not including, the end of the length itself. And what I mean by that is we always start at 0, and now we'll go up to 19, because we're not going to actually be going up to 19, we're going to finish at 18. That is essentially one of the things that you must remember with Python. Just know when slicing objects, you're going to go up to, but not including, the total length of the item itself. So if we were to actually run this, what we'd get is we'd have the entire object, the entire variable, I mean, printed out. But the reason I brought up length and slices is because rather than typing in 19, what we could do is we could do the length of the variable, of the object, I mean. So what's happening with this is we're printing apples, and we want to go ahead and slice the apples, but we want to start at the beginning with 0, and we don't want to go up to the length of apples. So we want to go through the entirety of apples itself. So if we were to go ahead and print this, again, we would get the same thing. Length will allow us to return the entire length of whatever the object is that we wanted printed out. In our case, we have apples. Finally, what we're going to be working on is inputs. The input function will ultimately allow us to input information into our program. It'll allow the user to input whatever it is that we're asking. For example, let's say we want to create another variable. Let's get rid of this, called ask. And ask will be equal to, please enter your age. And let's say we wanted to do an input, input of ask, and we wanted to go ahead and actually let's go ahead and print the input as well. So if we were to run this, what would happen is our program would go ahead and return what we just typed in. So please enter your age, and in it I could really enter whatever I wanted to. There'd be no effects against it because we have nothing else, but ultimately the input function will allow us to enter data into our program. So if we were to press enter, what would happen is we would be printing out our age, which is 18. So the input function will allow, again, the user to go ahead and input whatever it is that they want within their program. Another way of working with input is rather than using print the print function with the input, what we could always do also is just do input, and then we could do ask, and then again, we'd be able to go ahead and run our program. And this first program is being run because we called it first. So I'm going to just put 18. And then it printed out our response. And likewise, now we have, again, the other input. So please enter your age. So we're going to go ahead and put 25. And if we were to enter that, we wouldn't have the age printed out because we didn't call the print function. So just know when working with input, if you do want the result printed out after entering the age, what you can do is you can always add the print function. If you do not want the age printed out, or like the response, I should say, printed out, then don't bother putting the input or the print function with the input function. So hopefully you learned a little bit more about the basics of Python programming. If you like, please feel free to check out the website that I've got linked in the description, where the website will go into additional built-in functions for Python programming, and it'll have additional resources for you to go ahead and check out. And if you're a reader, I would highly recommend reading through the additional information from that website. Otherwise, please feel free to check out some of my other videos where I do go into Python programming. And I want to thank you for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks, guys.